We're we're happy to be able to be here with you again and to share a second in the series about medical missionary work. This is a very important work. It's so important that the closer we get to the end, the more the circumstances of earth will force us to do medical missionary work. And in fact, even pastors, if they don't know how to do medical missionary work, will be out of work. That's how serious things are going to get as we move forward. Well, if that's true of pastors, it's going to be true if we want to witness for the Lord. We're going to have to learn how to do that and to be involved now in the learning process. So this is part 2. Those of you that were here last time we were here, hopefully remember the first one. Now in Deuteronomy 7:15, we have a promise, and Paul in Corinthians chapter 10 explains the basic idea in the Bible. The idea is that whatever was written down was written specifically for the last days. So that means this text was written specifically for the last days, and everybody else that lived before would be able to also have the blessing. It says, "And the Lord will take away from thee all sickness, and will put none of the evil diseases of Egypt, which thou knowest, upon thee, but will lay them upon all them that hate thee." Now, the background is that for thousands of years, people could break all the health laws and they didn't get sick. But eventually, breaking the health laws brought sickness. And that was just about the time of the Egyptian period. Perhaps slightly before that, and people began to get a lot of the diseases that are prevalent in our world today. And so as God led his people out, he said, "I am going to deliver you from all these diseases." Is there anybody here that likes to be sick? Well, I think anybody would give that answer, because sickness is very hard to bear. And the worse the sickness is, the harder it is to bear. But what we don't realize, and that's what I want to talk to you today a little bit about, is that sickness comes from our lifestyle. Now, there are other factors. It's not the only factor, but it's the biggest factor. It comes from our lifestyle and from the lifestyle of our parents and those who have gone before us. So, if we don't like being sick, it's a reminder that we need to look at our lifestyle. In Counsels on Health, page 19, it says, "Although the antediluvians generally gave themselves up to sin without restraint, it was more than 2,000 years before the violation of natural law was sensibly felt." So by the time of the flood, they could do anything, eat anything, live any old way they wanted to, and nobody got sick. And even after the flood. But that eventually stopped. And we might be tempted to think, well, I wish I lived back then. But actually, we have the best chance to correct our lifestyle because we get sick fast when we break those health laws that God has given. And that brings us really to the place where we're going to live in heaven. You know, there are things that we may like to eat now, but if we keep on liking to eat those, when we get to heaven, we're going to be saying, where is it? I can't find it up here. And we're going to have a struggle. So God wants to help the last generation to get really ready for heaven and to get their lifestyle in line with the way that they're going to live throughout eternity. Had Adam originally possessed no greater physical power than men now have, the race would ere this have become extinct. So, we wouldn't have to worry about climate change, although I think they're exaggerating that a great deal. But because the race would already been dead, there would be no one living on planet Earth. So God had the plan in the very beginning when He created Adam and Eve. He had to create them so that the human race could last until the end of time. And we are definitely at the end of time. Sickness is everywhere. Young people are sick. They're in their teens and they're in their early 20s and they have all kinds of sickness. And I don't know how many more generations will be able to live because it's just getting so bad. And yet, by living the heavenly lifestyle, we can enjoy a lot of good health. Because God wanted Seventh-day Adventists to have not only a message of the three angels to the world, but a part of the three angels' message is the health message. And unfortunately, we have not paid as much attention to that part, but it's time that we did. And so we read this. This was the first vision given to Ellen White in regard to health. And, you know, our pioneers a lot of them were in really bad health. And in fact, Ellen White had plenty of bad health. But this message helped to correct that. I saw that it was a sacred duty to attend to our health and arouse others to their duty. Now we talk about the man that's smoking a cigarette and he's telling his son, don't smoke. Doesn't work, does it? The son is very likely to smoke. However, that's just one issue. But there are many issues. And every one of them, in order for us to teach other people, we have to be practicing them. We have a duty to speak, to come out against intemperance of every kind. And then it gives 4 major areas where a change is needed. Intemperance in working. Now, any health that I haven't gotten back yet, as I look into the past, I realize I was a workaholic. I worked my way through college, and to do that, I had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And of course, I was taking as many classes as I could, hoping to get done soon. And by the end of school, I was not in good condition at all. Well, then I didn't learn the lesson. And, everybody pats you on the back when you do things, and so I took on too much, and finally it ended up with a total physical collapse. I spent a year where I couldn't do much of anything, but I did learn my lesson on that one. So many of us, I sometimes wonder, do some Seventh-day Adventists resent paying tithe so they make up for it by working too hard? I don't know. But as Adventists, we tend to work too hard. And so that needs to be corrected. Second one it mentions is eating. We have made some changes before we were baptized. At least I hope everyone was told about that. But that's not the end of the changes. There's many things in the way of eating that need to be changed. And then the third one is drinking. And I've noticed, since my father was a pastor and I grew up in the Adventist church, I've noticed that Seventh-day Adventists drink things that they just generally never did before. So things have not been going in the right direction. They've been going downward as far as what some Adventists at least are drinking, and quite a few. So there are changes that need to be made in that area. And the fourth one, and in drugging. Well, that's not just talking about, those drugs that people take to lose reality and all that, but it includes the drugs that doctors give out. Now, doesn't mean you never take any of that, but doctors in general over-medicate. You can read this in the journals, it's not hard to find out that that's what they do, because they are practicing defensive medicine. And they don't want to get sued, and so they give you more drugs than what you need. I just had an experience, just a small experience recently. I had an appointment to have my skin checked for skin cancer. I do that once a year to make sure that we catch anything early. And he noticed that I had some cold sores on my lip, and that was again due to overexerting myself, because I was right in the middle of a seminar and I wasn't smart enough to say I gotta quit. I should have. But I felt, I'll disappoint them, and so I ended up running my system down. Well, anyway, he noticed those cold sores. So he immediately wrote out a prescription for a couple of medications. And I probably should have told him I don't want them, but I didn't. And so the pharmacy called me up, and they wanted to know why I hadn't picked up the drugs. I said, well, by the time he prescribed them, I was already getting better, and now I'm completely better, so I don't need them. Well, obviously then that wasn't needed. But, he's afraid that if he doesn't give me something and it gets worse, then there's going to be a problem, that I'm going to fuss about it. So I've learned, because of seeing many doctors in a lifetime, that I have to make the decision whether I'm going to take it or not. I remember one time I was sent to a specialist in regard to my lungs, because that's what got damaged in those years of overwork. So he tested me out, and there was a little spot on my lung that even the Wildwood doctors weren't sure what it was, and that's another reason they wanted a specialist to check it out. So I went to the specialist. He told me, well, you've only got 60% lung capacity of a man your age. Well, that wasn't too good of news. And he didn't know what that spot in my lung was. So he prescribed some medicine that I should take. I got home. My wife always looks up on the internet to see what is the effects of the drug. And the first thing that was listed as a side effect of the drug was death. So she said, you're not taking that. So instead what I did was took hydrotherapy treatments for a year. At the end of that year, they did an x-ray and that spot was gone. I don't know what it was. Nobody ever diagnosed it, but it was gone. And so this is what is talking about. That there are changes that need to be made by Seventh-day Adventists in all four of these areas. And if we will learn what they are, and we'll talk about a few of them today, but if we learn what they are, we can have the fulfillment of that promise. So in temperance, in working, in eating, in drinking and drugging, and then point them to God's great medicine. And one of his great medicines is water, pure, soft water, for diseases, for health, for cleanliness, and for a luxury. There was many years ago, you can read about it in the book Story of Our Health Message, there was a man who was not a physician, but somehow he had learned how to treat people with water. And as a result, he became a world-famous healer. Now, the physicians didn't like him because he wasn't a doctor. He didn't have a degree as a doctor. And so he got pulled into court constantly because he was treating people and they were getting well. And, you know, people were flocking to him. But you know how he got off from every court case? He said, I only use water. I wish I knew all the treatments he was giving, but he treated an incredible number of diseases with water. And we've learned a little bit there at Wildwood of how to treat with water. Things like hydrotherapy, fever treatments, and various other types of water treatments. And of course, Dr. Kellogg, the most famous Adventist physician, he even wrote a book in regard to how to use water. One thing that my wife discovered when she was having a little difficulty with high blood pressure is how a really hot shower will bring your blood pressure down. And so this was something that we've been able to use as well. But God has a desire to teach Seventh-day Adventists how to handle as many diseases as possible by the use of what we call natural means. Now, it's not just some of us, but Ellen White and her husband had a difficulty working too hard as well. So here's what Ellen White said about her own need and her husband's need. Third selected message is 279. I saw that we should encourage a cheerful, hopeful, peaceful frame of mind. For our health depends upon our doing this. So if we develop that frame of mind, instead of worrying all the time, being upset over this and that and the other thing, it will make a difference. I saw that it was a duty for everyone to have a care for his health, but especially should we turn our attention to our health and take time to devote to our health, that we may in a degree recover from the effects of overdoing and overtaxing the mind. So James and Ellen White are giving themselves a recipe, but in doing it, they're helping us to understand what we need to do in order to get rid of the effects of when we weren't obedient. Going on, it says, the work God requires of us will not shut us away from caring for our health. I didn't put this in, but in Ministry of Healing, there's a challenging statement to me and to many of us. There is time in every day to do everything we need to do for ourselves and for the world. That's a challenging statement. But there is time. And so apparently James and Ellen White didn't always follow that, but when they became awakened about health, they realized we need to do this. And they sought to do it. What is the cause of disease? Second selected messages, 4:11 and 12. Since the fall in Eden, the race has been degenerating. Now that we can't do anything about, except we can make it degenerate less through us to the next generation. Here's the things that have come about: deformity, imbecility, disease, and human suffering have been pressing heavier and heavier upon each successive generation since the fall. And yet the masses are asleep as to the real causes. Well, we don't want to be asleep as Adventists. The rest of the people are asleep. They look at disease as something that God decrees for them to have, and instead of thinking, oh, maybe I should have lived differently, and so that I didn't get this. And that includes a wide variety of things. I listened to a doctor who told me, or not told me, but he was sharing on this video, that he had a group of 30,000 children that had never been vaccinated. Now, I'm not saying nobody should ever be vaccinated, but he had a group of 30,000 children who hadn't been vaccinated, and he said there's not a single case of autism in those 30,000 children. So apparently there are things that need to really be looked into in order to protect from some of these things that it says have come about as a result of the race getting, degenerating over time. They do not consider that they themselves are guilty in a great measure. Now, we can't do much about the past generations, but in a great measure, we bring on ourselves what happens to us. I know that was my case. I definitely brought it upon myself, and I've been spending all the years since then to try to regain all I can. They generally charge their sufferings upon providence and regard God as the author of their woes. But it is intemperance, to a greater or less degree, that lies at the foundation of all this suffering. So that's our work as Adventists, to learn what it is, practice it ourselves, and to share it with the world. Because they don't like getting sick either, and yet they just don't make the connection. There is an awakening, though, among non-Adventists. From what I can see in the years I've been in that business, which has been over 50 years in the health business, and I have never seen more interest than there is right now. Let's look at one of the key areas just briefly. In Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 12, it says, "Blessed art thou, O land, when thy king is the son of nobles, and thy princes eat in due season, for strength and not for drunkenness." Now there's several things in that text. One of the practices that is very damaging to people's health is eating between meals. But you notice it says, you're really blessed if you have leadership that don't do that. They eat in due season. They eat when it's the right time to eat. And when they eat, instead of eating too much, calls that drunkenness here in this, because there is a change in our mental abilities when we eat too much. And it also includes articles that are harmful that cause that as well. And it says you're really blessed when you have leadership like that. And also in Proverbs 23, verses 1 and 2, it says, "When thou sittest to eat with a ruler, consider diligently what is before thee, and put a knife to thy throat, if thou be a man given to appetite." Well, you can imagine, a king, he can afford to have all kinds of delicacies and everything you might really think you'd enjoy to eat. And so you would be in a great danger of eating too much. Now that's pretty serious to say, put a knife to your throat rather than eat too much. Isn't that right? Pretty serious, but that's how serious the issue is. We know that's where Jesus had to start. When he came to face temptation in the wilderness, he had to start with appetite. And we're told that in order to conquer appetite, he had to go 6 weeks without food, almost 6 weeks, in order to conquer how strong appetite is. So there's a huge battle there that we all have to fight. Don't think that because a person's skinny, they don't have to fight that battle. Everybody has to fight that battle. But God has the power to help us overcome. In Counsels on Health, page 18, it says, "The present enfeebled condition of the human family was presented before me. Every generation has been growing weaker, and disease of every form afflicts the race. Thousands of poor mortals with deformed, sickly bodies, shattered nerves, and gloomy minds are dragging out a miserable existence." Depression is becoming one of the greatest health issues in our world. And if you're sick a lot, you're going to be faced with that. It just is a discouraging condition to be in. Satan's power upon the human family increases. If the Lord should not come and destroy his power, the earth would ere long be depopulated. Now that was written over 100 years ago, but we can see it so clearly today. We don't even need an inspired person to tell us that the way things are going, that it can't last much longer. With the predictions that they have of what they think the future holds, they won't need to worry about it. This is not going to last. God has established the laws of our being. If we violate these laws, we must sooner or later pay the penalty. It's not an arbitrary act on God's part when we get sick, but it is the result primarily of our habits and partly the habits of those that have gone before us. And so those things are what pile up, and sooner or later there is a penalty that has to be paid. The laws of our being cannot be more successfully violated than by crowding upon the stomach unhealthy food. So if we looked at all the areas of life, the one that does the most damage is how we eat. And the unhealthy type of food, is the kind that our human nature likes the best. It tastes the best to our human nature. Now, I can testify that if you follow God's program of eating, and I'm not saying I'm perfect in it, but some changes have been fully made to the point where what I used to eat doesn't taste good anymore. But it takes a lot of time for that to happen. And some may never, like sugary things. Still taste good to me, although some things I'm not used to that kind of sweetener, and so it can get overwhelming, but I still struggle with that taste. But this food that's unhealthy is the kind we need to find out what it is and begin to change. Don't try to change everything at once. You'll get discouraged. But, start with one or two, make those changes. When you get those set, try some other things that you have found out is not healthy. What is the problem? Well, it says, because craved by a morbid or sickly appetite. And what your parents ate had its effect upon you, what you like to eat, and all of this, and what we've eaten before we knew any better. So we have quite a bit of work to do. To eat to excess, and now we're talking about overeating, of even simple food. So you could eat very healthily and eat too much, and that wouldn't be good either. Will eventually break down the digestive organs. But add to this the eating in too great an amount of food, and that unwholesome, and the evil is greatly increased, the constitution must. Doesn't say it could, it says it must become impaired. So there will be some damage even if we don't become aware of some sickness, but there will be some damage every time we disobey the laws of health. Just like there's always a result when we disobey the Ten Commandments. And by the way, the health message is in the Ten Commandments, but it's just not seen as clearly. But it is there. In Second Selected Messages 4:20, it says, men and women, by indulging the appetite in eating rich and highly seasoned foods, especially flesh meats, with rich gravies, and by using stimulating drinks as tea and coffee, create unnatural appetites. So there's the only specific things that I'm pointing out today, but that's a beginning list. There's a lot more. But if any of those things are being done, you can be sure that your body is being hurt. The system becomes fevered. The organs of digestion become injured. The mental faculties are beclouded, while the baser passions are excited and predominate over the nobler faculties. Now, this is giving some details of why, if we conquer in the area of appetite, we will be able to conquer other things that we maybe even gave up on, and we thought, well, there's no way I can conquer that, because you tried to conquer it and you couldn't seem to conquer it. But these things are tied together, and so we have to get down to the root. And when we take care of the root, all of a sudden we start having victories in other areas. You know, and the same is true of overwork. When I was overworking the worst in my life, I noticed that I was impatient with my wife. And I knew I shouldn't be impatient with her. And so I started praying. I said, Lord, you got to help me to always be patient. But you know what? He never gave me the victory until I got sick. And when I got sick, I couldn't overwork. And all of a sudden, I was patient with my wife all the time. That works the same with appetite, that we have to address where it all begins. This is the last part of that quote. The appetite becomes more unnatural. So you get a bigger battle now, because you crave more things that aren't good for you. And more difficult of restraint. The circulation of the blood is not equalized and becomes impure. The more we eat, the more blood is drawn to the stomach to try to handle this. And so it gets imbalanced in the body. The whole system is deranged, and the demands of appetite become more unreasonable, craving exciting, hurtful things until it is thoroughly depraved. So we're headed in a downward spiral until we attack this monster that has gotten so many people either sick or even worse things that happen to them. Until we tackle that by the power of God, and He stands ready. We read in the beginning what is God's desire. He wants us to not be sick. Even in the last generation, He wants us not to be sick. And He is going to do everything He possibly can to help us get to that, but He needs our cooperation with the things that we can do in order to get there. So again, I close with the question, do you like to be sick? Well, we got a work to do if we don't like to be sick.